Mike Lawson had always known that not everyone understood his son. He had come to accept that the world was full of people who saw variations as problems instead of just variations. But he had also learned to choose his battles to focus on making sure Daniel had the tools to handle the world, rather than wasting energy trying to change narrow-minded people. That was why, when they moved into Oak Ridge Estates, he didn't bother explaining anything to the neighbors. He figured it wasn't necessary. They figure out soon enough that Daniel was just a regular kid who liked structure, schedule, and quiet. The neighborhood seemed nice enough at first. The houses were well kept. The lawns were matching shades of green, and the streets were always clean. It had been a big decision to move here, but Mike needed a place where Daniel could feel safe. Somewhere that wasn't too wild. The city had become too unpredictable. Too many loud noises, too many interruptions, too many people who didn't get it here. He thought things would be different, and they were. At least for a little while. Daniel had his routine. School, walk home, an hour of video games, dinner, then his favorite activity, stargazing on the back porch. He never changed, never caused trouble, never did anything but moved through the world in his own steady, quiet way. But apparently quiet wasn't enough. And that was when Karen Duval made her presence known. Karen was the Homeowner Association president, and she looked apart. The sharp, stiff pastel blouses, the hair that never moved, the expression of constant disapproval, like the entire world was an inconvenience. Mike first met her 3 days after moving in when she showed up at his door with a clipboard and a fake smile. "Mr. Lawson," she greeted, glancing at the name on her list. "I'm Karen Duval, the president of the Homeowner Association. I like to personally welcome all new residents." My kid nodded, half listening as she rattled off a list of rules and regulations. Something about lawn maintenance, garbage pickup times, the proper paint colors for exterior doors. He let her talk, figuring it was easier to just nod along than to get into an argument. Then she asked in a tone that was a little too interested, "And who else lives here with you?" Mike hesitated. "Just me and my son, Daniel." Karen's smile faded as she said, like she had just solved the puzzle. "I saw him walking the other day." Mike didn't like the way she said it. There was something about her tone, like she was commenting on a stray dog wandering the street. Not a 17-year-old kid minding his own business. "He's very quiet," she added. "I noticed. Not very social, is he?" Mike's jaw stiffened. "Heck, autistic," he said, keeping his voice even. Karen's smile wavered. Just for a second. Not out of sympathy. Not out of understanding. It was something else. Something Mike had seen before. Pity. No discomfort. "Well," she said, recovering quickly, "I'm sure he's a sweet boy. But you know, we do like to keep an eye on things around here. Safety is our top priority." Mike didn't like the way that sounded either. Still, he let it go. He figured she was just one of those people, the kind who thought different meant dangerous. But then the letter started. At first, they were gentle. "Please be mindful of community appearance lingering in common spaces can make some residents uncomfortable. There have been reports of unfamiliar individuals on the sidewalks. Residents should remain aware of their surroundings." Mike ignored them. Daniel wasn't doing anything wrong. Then came the warnings. One evening, while Daniel was playing a video game, Mike stepped outside to take out the trash, found Karen standing at the edge of his driveway. She didn't look angry exactly, more like concerned. That fake, patronizing concern, "Mr. Lawson," she said in that overly polite way that made Mike's skin crawl. "I wanted to have a quick chat," Mike exhaled. "Can this way? It's been a long day." She smiled like she hadn't heard him at all. "I've noticed your son has been walking home alone," she said. "Every day. Same time, same route." Mike's eyes narrowed, so Karen clasped her hands together. "It just concerns me. Routine can be good, but sometimes it can also be suspicious." Mike blinked. "Strange," he repeated. Karen nodded solemnly. "There have been reports," she continued, lowering her voice like she was revealing some deep neighborhood secret of someone wandering through the area, walking slowly, looking at houses, pausing at intersections for too long. "People are uneasy." Mike's patience snapped. "Are you serious?" he said, You mean my son walking home from school? The same route he's taken since we moved in. Karen didn't even blink. We just want to make sure everyone feels safe, she said. Perhaps it would be better if he were accompanied by an adult. Mike gritted his teeth. He's 17, he said. He doesn't need a guardian. Karen sighed, as if he were being difficult on purpose. Well, I hope that's true, but just know we'll be watching. We have to keep the neighborhood safe. Then she turned and walked away. Mike stood there, fists clenched, watching her go. She thought she was subtle, but Mike had seen people like her before. People who hid their worry behind phony smile. People who thought being different made you dangerous. And people like that, they were the real threat. Mike didn't know it yet, but in just a few days, Karen was going to prove exactly how dangerous she was. Mike had seen it coming. He knew Karen was the kind of person who needed control, who relied on finding problems where none existed. He had seen people like her before, people who bent the rules to suit their own ease, who saw anyone different as a possible threat. But even knowing that, even expecting her to push the limits, he hadn't thought she would cross the line into something truly dangerous. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the same way every Tuesday evening happened. Daniel left school at exactly 3:45 p.m., walked his usual route home, stopping at the same intersections, waiting for the same crosswalk lights, moving at the same steady speed he always did. He was predictable, dependable in his routine. That routine made him feel safe. It was how he understood the world. Karen had been watching him for weeks, waiting, and that day, she finally decided to act. Mike was still at work when the call came. He had just stepped out of a meeting, massaging the tension from his forehead, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He almost ignored it, almost let it go to voicemail, but something in his gut told him to answer. The voice on the other end was a stranger. "Are you the father of a kid named Daniel Lawson?" Mike's breath caught in his throat. "Yes," he said. Already grabbing his keys. "Who is this?" "This is Officer Martinez with Oak Ridge PD. The voice said, calm but firm. "We need you to come to the station immediately. Your son has been involved in an event." Mike's heart dropped. What happened? Is he okay? The officer hesitated. "He's stable, but you need to get here now." Mike broke every speed limit getting there. His hands were shaking as he pulled into the parking lot, heart pounding too loud in his ears. He barely parked before he was out of the car, storming into the station, searching for Daniel, and when he saw him, his stomach turned. Daniel sat in one of the waiting area chairs, curled in on himself, hands gripping his arms, like he was trying to hold himself together. His breathing was shallow, his shoulders hunched, his eyes glazed and unfocused. But what made Mike's blood run cold? What sent a bolt of pure, unfiltered rage through his chest? With the bruise on Daniel's temple, a fresh, ugly mark just starting to swell, Mike crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling in front of Daniel, trying to keep his voice calm. "Buddy," he murmured, "look at me." Daniel didn't. He just rocked slightly, his fingers tapping out an uneasy rhythm on his leg. Mike turned, snapping his gaze to the nearest officer. "What happened?" His voice was low. "Dangerous." The officer sighed. "It's a complex simple." The officer exchanged a nervous look with his partner, then gestured for Mike to follow him down the hall. Mike reluctantly stood, casting one last glance at Daniel before following them into a small office. And that's when they told him Karen had shoved Daniel. The words didn't register at first. Mike just stared, his mind refusing to process it. What he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper, the officer shifted. "From what we gathered, Karen Duvall confronted your son. On his way home from school, she approached him near the neighborhood entrance, blocking his path. Witnesses say she was forceful. She started questioning him, where he was going, why he was walking so slowly, why he was acting strange." Mike's hands curled into fists, and then the officer exhaled sharply. Daniel tried to walk away. She grabbed his arm to stop him. He pulled back, and that's when he hesitated. Mike's voice dropped to something deadly when what the officer's gaze was flat, unreadable, when she pulled out a taser and used it on him. The room spun for a moment. All Mike could hear was his own heartbeat roaring in his ears like a distant fire alarm. His voice caught raw with fury. She shocked my son, the officer nodded. Grimly, she claimed he was resisting and that she was protecting the neighborhood. Mike growled. He slammed his hands on the desk, voice thundering. She attacked a child. A disabled child. You're telling me she thought she was what, cop? A security guard? What kind of maniac? The officer held up a hand. Mr. Lawson, we're on your side. She's already been taken into custody. Mike's chest heaved. She was arrested? Yes. The officer's voice was hard, steady. There were witnesses and security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera caught everything. We have enough to charge her with assault. Mike exhaled, sharply trying to regain control of his breathing. She's in a holding cell right now, the officer continued, and will be proceeding with formal charges. You have the right to press additional charges if you choose. Mike didn't even hesitate. I want to throw everything at her, he said firmly. I want her buried under every possible charge. The officer nodded. Understood? Mike ran a shaking hand down his face, trying to pull himself together. Then he turned back toward the door. I want to see my son. When he returned to Daniel, he found him still curled up, still small, still too quiet. Mike sat beside him, not saying anything for a long moment. Then carefully, gently, he reached out and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Daniel flinched. Mike's heart broke. It's okay, he whispered. You're safe now. Daniel's fingers twitched. His breathing was still shaky, still steady. But after a long moment, he finally looked up and Mike swore right then and there that he would never let anyone hurt his son again. Not Karen, not the homeowner association, not anyone. Mike had always considered himself a reasonable man. He had spent years teaching himself to pick his battles, to let things go when necessary, to focus on what really mattered. Because in the end, nothing mattered more than Daniel. But now, there was no letting this go, no ignoring it, no brushing it off as just another homeowner association power play. Karen had crossed the line into something unforgivable. By the time Mike got Daniel home, he could barely control his rage. Every time he looked at his son, at the marks on his temple, at the way his hands still shook slightly from the sensory overload of the attack, it only stoked the fire in his chest. Daniel had always been so careful, so routine-oriented, so non-threatening in every way imaginable. And yet, this woman had shoved him like he was some kind of threat. And now Karen was sitting in a holding cell, and Mike had no intention of letting her get away with this. The first thing he did when they got home was call his lawyer friend Brian. She did what? Brian nearly spit on his coffee when Mike told him everything. She shoved my son, Mike repeated, voice like steel, and I want her to pay for it. Brian didn't even hesitate. Oh, she's going to pay, all right. I'll handle everything. Pressing civil charges, getting a restraining order, making sure she never sets foot in that association office again. But, what I need you to be smart about this, Brian warned. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but you can't go in there guns blazing. Let the evidence do the work. Mike exhaled sharply. He knew Brian was right, but knowing it and feeling it were two very different things. The next morning, Mike took Daniel to the doctor for a full medical evaluation. He wanted everything documented: the bruising, the trauma, the after effects of the shock. The doctor confirmed that while Daniel didn't have any lasting physical damage, the psychological impact could be much worse. He's silent right now because of the stress, the doctor told Mike, voice calm but serious. I don't know how long it'll last, but I strongly recommend therapy. This kind of incident, it can create long-term anxiety, trust issues, PTSD. Mike's stomach sank. He had fought so hard to make Daniel feel safe, in his own skin, in his own home, in his own life. And now, because of one woman's fear and entitlement, all of that was at risk. By the afternoon, Mike had gathered everything he needed: the medical reports, the police report, the security footage from the neighbor's doorbell camera that showed Karen blocking Daniel's path, grabbing his arm, and then tasering him without reason. And then he called a community meeting. Karen had spent years ruling the high like a tyrant, making life miserable for anyone who dared to step out of line. But this was Unusual. This wasn't a dispute over paint colors or garbage, B. This was an attack on a child. And Mike wasn't the only one who was furious. By the time the meeting started, dozens of people had gathered in the clubhouse, whispering to each other in hushed tones, throwing angry glances toward the empty homeowner association chair at the front of the room. Karen wasn't there. She was still sitting in a police station, waiting to see if she could escape her way out of this. Mike took a deep breath and stepped forward. He didn't give a speech. He didn't need to. Instead, he pulled out his phone and played the security footage. The room fell dead silent. The grainy video showed everything. Karen standing in the middle of the sidewalk, blocking Daniel's path, her arms crossed, her mouth moving rapidly as she questioned him. The way she grabbed his arm when he tried to walk away. The way she reached into her purse, pulled out the taser, and used it on him without hesitation. The gasps in the room were audible. One woman actually covered her mouth in shock. A man near the back whispered, "Jesus Christ." Mike let the video finish playing before he spoke. "I don't need to tell you what's wrong with this," he said, voice low and steady even though his hands were clenched into fists. "Karen Duval attacked my son. She called him suspicious for walking home, for existing, for being autistic. She decided that made him a threat." Murmurs spread through the room, growing louder, angrier. "She thought she could get away with it," and continued, "because she always does. Because this homeowner association has let her get away with it for years." That was when the barriers opened. People started speaking up. "She fined my daughter for leaving her bike on the lawn for 2 minutes. She threatened to have my son's car towed for parking an inch over the line. She accused my husband of trespassing on our own property because he came home in his work uniform. She didn't recognize him. This isn't just a mistake," Mike said firmly. "This is who she is. And if we don't do something, she's going to keep hurting people." A man in the front row stood up. "Then let's get rid of her." The vote was complete. By the time the police finished processing Karen charges, she was already stripped of her position as homeowner association president. Her last grasp at power was gone. Mike didn't go to the hearing the next morning. He didn't need to. The charges were stacked against her. Assault on a minor, use of excessive force, false imprisonment. She couldn't talk her way out of this one. The last time Mike saw her, she was being escorted out of her house by the sheriff, her face red with anger and humiliation, screaming about how it was all a misunderstanding, how she was just protecting the neighborhood, how this was unjust. Mike just stood on his porch watching. She had spent so long watching everyone else, now she was the one being watched. Daniel stood beside him, silent, watching her go. Mike looked down at his son. "You okay?" Daniel thought for a moment. Then he gave a small, tired nod. Mike put an arm around his shoulders. "She's gone," he said softly. "She can't harm you anymore." For the first time in days, Daniel's body relaxed, and Mike finally felt like he could breathe again. Karen was gone. But for Mike, the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Not until he was sure that she would never be able to do this to anyone else. The day after Karen was escorted from her home in handcuffs, the entire neighborhood was still filled with whispers. It was the first time in years that people weren't afraid to talk about her openly. Mike had spent most of the morning ignoring the talk. He didn't care about the neighborhood rumors, didn't care about what people were saying behind their closed doors. What he cared about was Daniel. For the past 2 days, Daniel had been quiet. Too quiet. He hadn't gone outside. He hadn't followed his routine. He hadn't even looked at the front door since coming home from the hospital. Mike knew. His son knew that routine was safety for him, that his world was structured, predictable. And no, that had been broken. That night after dinner, Mike found him sitting on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. He sat down beside him, careful not to crowd him. "Hey, buddy," he said, voice soft. "You want to go outside for a little bit?" Daniel didn't answer, didn't even acknowledge him. Mike swallowed. His chest tightened. "You don't have to if you don't want to," he continued. "But I want you to know something. You didn't do anything wrong." Daniel's fingers moved against the fabric of his jeans. Mike watched him carefully. She made you feel like you did, but she was wrong, and she's gone now. Daniel finally looked at him, and for the first time in days he spoke. Will she come back? Mike's heart broke. No, he said strongly, she won't. Daniel studied him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he gave a small nod. Okay, Mike exhaled, reaching out slowly. You want to sit outside with me for a little while? Daniel hesitated, then nodded again. Mike didn't push for more, didn't expect him to go on his usual walk, didn't expect him to pick up where he left off. But this was a start, and Mike would take it. The next morning, Mike met with his lawyer. Brian had already started putting together the case, working through every possible charge they could press against Karen. This is about more than just her going to jail, Brian explained, flipping through a folder of paperwork. We need to make sure this doesn't get ignored. That means making sure she can't come back here, making sure she's financially responsible for everything she's done. Mike nodded. I don't just want her locked up, he said. I want her buried? Brian grinned. Oh, don't worry, she won't have a leg to stand on when I'm done. By the end of the week, the official lawsuit had been filed. It wasn't just for assault. It was for careless endangerment, deliberate infliction of emotional distress, and civil damages for Daniel's medical expenses. And the best part, it wasn't just Mike suing. The entire association turned against her. Neighbors started coming forward. People who had been intimidated by Karen for years, but had never spoken up. Out of fear, now that she was out of power, now that they saw what she had done to Daniel, they weren't afraid anymore. They wanted her gone. They wanted justice. The next 2 months were a public nightmare for Karen. The news picked up the story. What had started as a small neighborhood issue turned into a headline about an homeowner association president assaulting an autistic teenager. Local reporters ran with it, the footage of her pushing Daniel. It played on the evening news for weeks. Karen tried to fight the charges. She claimed she had been in fear for her life, that she had been acting in self-defense. No one bought it. The security footage ruined her defense. Witness statement sealed her fate. She wasn't just facing a civil lawsuit anymore, she was facing criminal charges. And when she finally stood in front of a judge, the verdict came down fast and hard. Guilty on all counts. The judge didn't hold back. He called her actions a gross abuse of power, a pointless act of violence, and sentenced her to 2 years in prison. Mike sat in the back of the courtroom watching Karen's face twist in disbelief. This isn't fair, she screamed. I was just protecting my community. The judge ignored her. The bailiff stepped forward and just like that, Karen was led away in handcuffs. Mike let out a slow breath. It was finally over. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. They swarmed him, microphones shoved in his way, cameras flashing. Mr. Lawson, how do you feel about today's verdict? Mike looked into the nearest camera, his voice steady, unwavering. I feel relieved, he said simply. But more than that, I feel hopeful. Because now, my son and every kid like him knows that they don't have to live in fear of people like her. He didn't wait for more questions. He turned and walked away. Back to Daniel, back to their home, back to peace. And Karen would never bother anyone again. Mick had thought that watching Karen being hauled away in handcuffs would bring him a closure he needed. But the truth was, the damage she had caused wasn't something that could be erased in a single moment. Karen was gone, but her actions had left wounds. The kind that didn't fade overnight. And the person suffering the most because of it, Daniel. It had been weeks since the sentencing, but Daniel's routine was still broken. Before Karen, he had always been predictable, structured. He enjoyed knowing what came next, enjoyed walking home the same way every day, stopping at the same places, counting the same steps. But ever since the attack, he hadn't set foot outside alone. At first, Mike hadn't pushed him. He figured Daniel just needed time, but time wasn't fixing it. Daniel had gone from being a kid who relied on routine to someone who jumped every time the doorbell rang. And that wasn't okay. Mick had spent years protecting his son, ensuring that the world didn't crush him under its weight. But now, Daniel was living in fear inside his own home. And that was something Mike couldn't accept. So that morning, as Daniel sat at the kitchen table, moving his cereal without eating it, Mike made a decision. "We're going outside today," he said. Daniel didn't look up, didn't respond. Mike sat down across from him, keeping his voice gentle. "You don't have to go far," he said. "Just to the driveway. Just to sit outside for a few minutes." Daniel's fingers moved. His eyes darted toward the window. Then, softly, "What if she comes back?" "Back?" Mike's heart broke all over again. "She won't," he said, steady but calm. "She's gone. She can't come back here." Daniel paused. Then after a long moment he nodded. It was small, but it was something. Mike walked with him to the front porch. He watched as Daniel stepped out, slowly, carefully, like he was testing the air. For the first time in weeks, he sat outside. Not far, not for long, but he was outside. And that was enough for the next few days. Mike made it a routine. Step outside, breathe, sit for a little while. Then one evening, something happened that he didn't expect. Daniel turned to him and said, "I want to walk." Mike stiffened. Daniel hadn't walked anywhere alone since the attack. Mike fought the urge to ask if he was sure. Instead, he simply nodded. "All right, buddy, let's go." They started slowly down the sidewalk, just to the end of the street. Then a little further. The next day, then a little further. It took weeks, but eventually Daniel walked his entire route again. And when he came home, he looked at Mike and said that was okay. Mike had never felt prouder. Daniel was healing. It was not instant. It wasn't perfect, but step by step, they were getting their lives back. And that was the greatest victory of all. The world didn't stop for feelings. It never did. Life kept moving, kept spinning forward, kept demanding things of people, whether they were ready or not. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Mike didn't feel like they were just surviving. He didn't wake up every morning with his stomach tight in anger. Didn't spend every evening watching the front door like he was waiting for another attack. The fear was still there, buried deep, but it wasn't ruling them anymore. The difference was slight, so small was almost hard to notice, but it was there. Daniel was smiling more. He still didn't talk much about what had happened, still didn't acknowledge it outright. But he no longer jumped at the sound of footsteps outside. He no longer checked the windows before going to bed. He had regained his routine, regained his space, regained himself. And for Mike, that was all that mattered. Karen was gone for good. After her conviction, she had no choice but to sell her house. And Mike didn't bother asking where she went. He didn't care. She was no longer part of their story. The homeowner association, desperate to repair its reputation after what happened, had been completely restructured. They had removed half their useless rules, and the new president, a retired teacher named Mrs. Holloway, had made it clear that things would be different moving forward. People were kinder now, less afraid. It was amazing how quickly a neighborhood could change. Once the fear of an iron-fisted ruler was gone, Mike found himself breathing easier. Then one afternoon, something surprising happened. Daniel was outside sitting on the porch when a small voice spoke up beside him. "Hi." Mike, who had been cleaning up in the garage, turned to see a young girl, maybe 9 or 10, standing near the bottom of the porch steps. She had a piece of sidewalk chalk in her hand, her fingers smudged with bright colors. Daniel looked at her, but didn't say anything. The girl didn't seem to mind. "I like drawing," she continued. "You want to see?" Daniel paused, then nodded. The girl smiled, running over to where she had been drawing on the sidewalk. Mike followed slowly, watching as Daniel got up and walked over. The drawing was simple but colorful. Giant sun, a few clouds, some kind of rocket ship. Daniel tilted his head. "It's good." The girl glowed. "Thanks. My name's Emma. You live here, right?" Daniel nodded again. "I've seen you before," she said. "You always walk the same way home." "Home?" Daniel looked down at his shoes. "Yeah." Emma didn't seem to think anything of it. "That's cool," she said. "Want to help me draw?" For a moment, Daniel didn't move. Then slowly, he reached down, picked up a piece of blue chalk, and carefully began tracing the outline of a planet next to the rocket ship. Mike stood back, watching the two of them, something warm settling in his chest. Daniel was okay. Maybe not completely. Maybe not all the way, but he was okay. And for the first time in a long time, so was Mike. Because life wasn't about getting back to normal. It was about finding a new normal. One where Daniel wasn't afraid anymore. One where he could walk home without fear. One where Karen Duval was nothing more than a bad memory. And in the end, that was the best payback of all. Then,